What would you do if you had the opportunity to speak on international television? And what if you didn't realize it was an opportunity to speak on international television? That's what happens to the subject of our speech analysis today, Ruby Tui. Now, you probably don't know who Ruby Tui is. She's not our traditional speaker doing a traditional speech. Let me enlighten you. Ruby Tui is a World Cup winner, a Commonwealth gold medalist, an Olympic gold medalist, and Rugby World Player of the Year. She has achieved excellence on the field in her sport of rugby, and she's also an absolute legend of a personality off her as well. And I've got to admit that this interview was the first time I'd ever seen or heard of her, and she won me over in 2 minutes with this infectious, entertaining, memorable interview. So much so, I've continued to follow her on the field and off the field for the years afterwards. I even have her book as well. I'd highly recommend you go and read it. If you don't know who she is, this is going to give you a great outline of who she is, why she's a legend, and how she's achieved excellence. And what I wanted to look at was what she does so well in this particular interview. As I said, I'm now a fan for life based off of 2 minutes on TV. Now, the background to this is we are at the Tokyo Olympics. You know, the weird COVID one that happened a year after it was supposed to happen, and it didn't really feel like the Olympics because there was no fans there to watch it. But this was a definite highlight from that strange time. What happens is at the end of a match, someone asks Ruby Tui for an interview. Now, what she doesn't realize, they say, can we have an interview for the BBC? Ruby Tui is a New Zealander. She actually doesn't know who the BBC are. They're our national television corporation here in the UK, and they also have an international presence as well. So they are watched around the world, but they're not necessarily as well known around the world. So Ruby Tui comes on thinking that this is going to be a small, quiet interview, doesn't necessarily realize that it's going to be televised, definitely doesn't appreciate how widespread it's going to get televised. And I think this demonstrates the power of just being yourself. Just being yourself. When you are going onto a high stakes stage, you're speaking at an important convention, you've got a lot of exposure, there is real power in just being yourself. What we're going to look at in this speech analysis is how Ruby is able to embody being herself, still employing a lot of really powerful techniques in speaking. And let's see if she can win you over in 2 minutes the same way she won me over in 2 minutes.
Oh, I've got an interview. Ruby, can I just... Sorry, I'm just going to do a quick interview, Hazel. And that means I'm going to put my mask on. Sorry about that. But let's get some reaction to that fine performance from New Zealand.
BBC.
BBC.
Be clear of your mind.
Ruby, can you...
What we see here is starting with a joke. BBC, better be clear. And starting with a joke is a fantastic way to build that rapport and connection with the audience. Now, it can be a little bit of a risky strategy because you need them to laugh, otherwise it doesn't work. But I think that great speaking always comes with a little bit of risk. It always comes with taking a chance. You don't do great things if you don't take a chance. And starting with a joke, if you get it right, make sure you really lean into it. If you're going to take that risky strategy, commit to it, go full in, give it the full energy, the full impact, and give yourself the best possible chance of getting that strong start. Because when you start off a joke and you get a laugh right off the bat, the audience they're not quite in the palm of your hand at that point, but they're certainly looking at it going, that looks like a nice place to sit. So we get this great strong start from Ruby with a little bit of humor, and she's only going to bring the energy even more from this point forward.
But one thing's for sure, you came out strong today because you were wanting to improve after yesterday.
Okay, you're probably wondering what was Ruby saying there. If you don't know, which you probably don't, Ruby is from a Samoan background. So at this moment, she's speaking the indigenous language of Samoa. And what this demonstrates is understanding how to connect with parts of your audience. Here, Ruby is wanting to address that Samoan viewership, people that she might know from back in Samoa, friends, family. She's also wanting to honor that heritage and part of her culture. So she speaks their language, in this case, literally a different language from English. But there are times where we want to connect with a section of our audience as well. And in order to do so, we need to speak their language. Now, this doesn't mean switching out of English, but it does mean speaking their words, using their phrases, their lingo, their colloquialisms. So when they're listening to you speaking in their language, they might feel like you are one of them and you are representing them. Or at the very least, you're someone who understands them. You're someone who appreciates them. You're someone who can connect with them. And that's the importance of speaking our audience's language. If your audience is sitting there going, this person isn't speaking my language, it's not because they can't understand your words. It's because that they feel like you're not someone who they can connect with. You're not someone who's like them. But when you do use that language, you build that rapport, build that connection. Just wanted to bring up that part of the clip again. Do you see Ruby's eye contact? When she's speaking Samoan and she's addressing the Samoan section of her audience, she's looking down the camera, looking and engaging with them. And this is a mistake that you can see happen a lot, not just when you're in this virtual dynamic, when there's a camera involved. A lot of people aren't looking at the camera, they're looking at stuff. But actually, this is what can happen in a physical setting as well, that sometimes people forget that there is an audience there. For example, in panel discussions, what can often happen is that the speakers are bouncing back and forth, talking about each other in the panel, and it's like this private conversation that's completely ignoring the rest of the audience who's there. Or someone has picked out an audience member and they're having this private back and forth conversation with them, and they're forgetting to also include the rest of the wider audience in this individual engagement as well. Ruby isn't making that mistake. She's got the interviewer here just off to the side, and it would be easy for her to just talk to the interviewer the whole time. But she knows that her audience is not there, her audience is there. And so when she wants to make this moment of connection, she's looking down the barrel of the camera, making that eye contact, generating that feeling of connection. The lesson we can learn from this as speakers is when you're speaking virtually, of course you should be looking down the camera, but also don't forget, even when you're in that physical setting, don't get yourself into a dynamic where you are speaking to a small section of your audience or other people who are on stage with you, and you're forgetting the wider audience as well.
They are bloody tough. They're a tough team. And to be honest, they were in at the last Olympics, so this is huge for them. Massive congratulations to Russia. Thank you so much.
What we're seeing here is some acknowledgement of the audience, and we're getting this switch now. There was Ruby talking to a Samoan aspect of the audience, but now she's talking to a Russian aspect of the audience. She's talking to some of the Russian players, Russian fans, people who might be watching from Russia. And what she's doing here is she's acknowledging that section of the audience, and she's also uplifting them as well, saying Russians were really tough, they didn't manage to get here last time, massive congratulations for being here this time. So when you are picking out different sections of the audience, you're wanting to raise them up, you're wanting to acknowledge them, you're wanting to appreciate them, because then you make them feel heard, then you make them feel seen, then you make them feel understood. So we're seeing already that Ruby has been breaking up her audience engagement into different sections. We've had some engagement with a Samoan aspect of the audience, we've had some engagement with a Russian aspect of the audience, and then we've also got just the general audience viewership that are seeing all of this, that she's building connection with, building rapport with, having that little back and forth interaction with. Lots of good stuff coming up here, and that's us just hit the 60-second mark of the interview.
I don't want to say the score made it look easy, but it was not easy. Don't be fooled. It was not an easy game.
You see that little, don't be fooled, again, it's playing with the camera. There's this interview going on here, but then there's still the engagement of the audience, bringing them in. And it's this lovely little feeling of a little bit of an in-joke. Hey, look, don't be fooled. And of course, the dynamics of how this plays out on camera is when Ruby does that to the camera, it makes you as the individual viewer feel acknowledged. I remember sitting watching this in one of the, those weird days of COVID. I don't think this was even at the weekend. I think this was on like a random weekday, middle of the day, with the time zone difference between us in the UK and Japan, Tokyo, where the Olympics were being held. So I was sitting there on my own. But when Ruby does that, it makes me sitting alone in my house during the COVID days feel seen, acknowledged. So it's a great little technique that works really well on camera for making the audience feel like they're a part of things. But actually, it's also something you can transfer to the physical stage as well. That when you pick out one audience member, you go, hey, don't be fooled. You're having that engagement and interaction with them, but it still feels like you're sharing the in-joke with the audience at the same time. So these are lovely little asides that are coming in. When you're delivering a speech, think about how you can throw out these asides, how you can build that connection, how you can grab that rapport, have those little individual moments of engagement, whether it's through the camera or with the individuals in your physical audience.
My GPS just blew up. That's how hard it was. So now lots of...
I love that gesture. Blew up. Now, when we're talking about gestures, it can be easy to start talking about gestures for gestures' sake, that you've got to bring in gestures in order to make your speaking effective. It's not about the gestures, it's about how the gestures feed into what you've said. And I love this little gesture. You've got the GPS, so you've got the GPS that's like built into the shirt. My GPS blew up. And when Ruby talks about blowing up, she does a big expressive gesture, because blowing up is something that's big and expressive. And that's the secret to gestures, is you don't have to be doing these exaggerated flamboyant gestures all of the time. But when there's an appropriate time, when it really lines up with what you're saying, go for it, go big. Similar to what I was saying with, if you start with a joke, don't just throw out the joke half-heartedly, commit to it, go for it, embrace it. And the same is true with these gestures, that when you have the opportunity to bring in that big gesture, commit to it and go for it. You see, Ruby Tui doesn't go, I had my GPS and it blew up. She goes, my GPS blew up. So you see the strength and the size of that. You don't have to be doing it all the time, but when it comes time to do it, when you commit to it and you go for it, it can have a great effect for your audience.
You know, I love how GB come together, eh? Like, you know, they all split up, but then for the Olympics, your friends, it's funny because on the scrum, they probably hate me saying this. Sorry, Abby. But when they go down, they go, England! Like, they're real.
Again, what we see here is the changing of the audience, again, picking out a different section of the audience. So here we're talking about Abby. There's a reference to Abby, one of the England rugby players playing for Team GP at the Olympics. And when you acknowledge an individual in the audience, it might feel like, oh, if I acknowledge one person, it's excluding the rest. But actually, this is one of the paradoxes of speaking, that including one person makes the rest feel included as well. Because if you're able to pick out one person for a special mention, a special acknowledgement, it makes all the audience feel like they can be picked out for that special acknowledgement. If you are delivering a mass message and it's generic, that genericness of the message can wash over an audience a little bit, and it can feel impersonal. It feels like it's maybe for others, but not for me. But when you have these individual acknowledgements, that changes this mass message approach to something that feels a little bit more intimate and personal. The best way to employ this is when you're in a smaller speech setting. If you're running something like a workshop where you have the smaller audience and you usually have that longer period of time with them as well, you have that opportunity to learn and remember people's names. This is when you want to start employing that technique. Pick people out. Peter, you were saying at the beginning of this session, for example, or this links back to your earlier point, Susan, on X, Y, Z. The more you can scatter in those little bit of name acknowledgements of bringing individual people into the speech, and then makes the rest of the audience feel like they can be brought into the speech as well. When you have the opportunity to pick out individuals in your audience and include them and engage them in the speech, by doing it with one person, you actually do it with every person.
A couple of us donated and they ended up at the Olympics, so huge mahi, big job, sorry. Mahi is me's job. So much good.
Here we see an international translation. We have Mahi, we have some Simone that's coming in. And what does Mahi mean? Mahi means big job. This is something to consider, particularly when you're doing your virtual sessions, when there's that increased likelihood you're going to have an international audience in there. You have to remember to make sure that you're translating anything that doesn't make sense to them. Now, this can be true even within the same language. I find this so often when I'm working with North American clients that they'll say something and I'll go, by the way, you'll need to translate that for people who aren't in North America. We don't use imperial in Europe, we use metric. So if you're talking about an imperial measurement, you're going to have to make sure that people who don't use imperial understand that. Or certain words and phrases, and this works the other way as well. Sometimes I'll use a word or a phrase and I kind of see the vacant look, and I didn't realize that that word or phrase is unique to Scotland, or it's unique to British English, and it doesn't translate into American English, or it doesn't translate to people speaking English as their second language because they've learned the standard variation of English. They haven't learned all the different variations on that standard variation. So this is a consideration, especially when you're speaking virtually and you've got that international audience, translating anything that won't translate. But also, it's still something to think about with your physical speeches as well. If you know that people are coming in from different places, they aren't just all in the same city as you're delivering the event in, or they don't all come from the same country, making sure that you have that international translation aspect running through your speech. Anything that doesn't quite compute to everyone, you need to make sure that it does compute for everyone. So we get a little bit of Samoan slip in here, and it's not to avoid these things because that's actually part of your personality and it's part of your avatar as a speaker. If Ruby Tui has that Samoan heritage, then I want to hear some Samoan coming through from her. That's what adds a richness and uniqueness to what she's doing. But also make sure that that Samoan translates so that we feel included in that, so we get the benefit of experiencing that Samoan culture. We don't go, oh, this is Samoan and it's not for me. That's where your translations come in, is making the audience still feel included and engaged at every moment in your speech. Another thing that I wanted to highlight, and this is the perfect screen capture for this, is Ruby speaks with a smile throughout her speech. She's got this warmth, this infectious enthusiasm and positivity, and that's a really important aspect of how we build connection and rapport with our audience. Absolutely, you want to be able to delve into those uncomfortable, difficult, challenging emotions. That's where we build some of that vulnerability. That's where we build that empathy. That's where we build that shared understanding. Of course, you want to tap into that. But our connection also comes from the positive stuff as well. We talked about humor early on. Humor is this fantastic way of building connection. When someone smiles and you can see that passion, you can see that excitement, that enthusiasm, that also connects with us as well. All strong emotion helps to build a connection. So utilizing the full array of strong emotion. So don't forget to have a smile when you speak. It's such a simple technique to build that warmth and connection with the audience.
Go, because I think the rain's coming. We'll see you tomorrow.
What rain? I love the thunder. Red Olympics, just be happy. Let's compete safely and peacefully. Peace and love. Love you, bye.
We love you too. Good to see you. There you go, Ruby.
And there you see an uplifting finish at the end. You want to make sure by the time you get to your speech, you are sending people off on a high. You're helping them to feel engaged, motivated, inspired, ready to change, feeling more positive and happy about themselves. And that's what we see with Ruby. We see that she turns this speech. This is just a speech about a game at a sports event, but she gets this wider message out of it. She says, hey, look, this isn't just about us throwing a ball around a pitch. This is about us coming together as an international community. It's about having safety. It's about having peace. It's about remembering some of these wider principles and wider virtues behind the Olympics. The Olympics is becoming more than just a collection of individual sports. And that's what you want to do with your speeches as well, is you want to connect to what's that wider message, what's that uplifting thing that I can send people off at the end. And Ruby does that in an unscripted, unprepared interview. Never mind thinking about how you might do this in a speech. I see speakers who have prepared a speech for ages and they aren't able to do this. They don't have that universal message with an uplifting flourish at the end. Ruby just does this off the cuff in an interview. It's fantastic to see this being put into action. And that the reason why I wanted to come onto this interview and highlight it and focus it, I know this isn't a traditional speaker doing a traditional speech, but you'll see how a lot of these techniques are coming through. In this case, this is something that the Ruby is doing naturally without thinking about it too much, because she didn't have time to think about it. She didn't know she was doing this interview. And I think the essence of this is when Ruby comes on, she's herself, she's enjoying herself, she expresses herself, has fun, and that builds this rapport and connection so quickly with the audience. And that's the take-home message from this speech, is whenever you're coming up on stage, prepared, unprepared, just have fun, express yourself, enjoy yourself. If you're having fun and enjoying yourself, you're probably going to be doing some things right. You're going to be doing some things that are connecting with the audience, that are building that rapport, and are going to lead to that uplifting send-off at the end. So something a little bit different here. I hope this has encouraged you to maybe watch the sport of rugby if you haven't watched it yet. It's my favorite sport. I love it, and I'm sure you will too if you get into it a little bit more. I'd also encourage you to go and look at Ruby Tui herself. Go and watch her playing rugby. She's got that fantastic autobiography as well. I'd highly recommend you get that. When you read that autobiography, you understand a little bit more about her character and her story and the background and what leads her to being this person that you see on camera. So an amazing individual, someone who's demonstrating fantastic speaking skills outside of the realm of traditional public speaking. And this is something I think is important for us as speakers to do, is we can learn the transferable skills from other arenas, other disciplines. It's why I tap into things like stand-up comedy. It's why I tap into things like theatre. It's why I tap into things like sports, because from these different domains, we learn some of the transferable skills that we can bring back into public speaking that give us a different dynamic and a different twist to the speaking that we're doing. And watching this video here, you've learned some of those techniques, things that you can bring in from a different arena that's going to enhance and improve your speeches. Whether you are planning to be on a big stage, or if like Ruby, you find yourself accidentally on a big stage.